Hey everybody, Bo Sanders here. I want to talk today about the danger of this false way we have inherited of thinking called a dualism. Some call it a binary. It's when two things, and sometimes there are two things that are given to us, but when they are placed in opposition and then in a hierarchy where one is superior to the other, it creates a real problem. Things that don't belong in that relationship are forced into it, and it has a series of consequences that we want to avoid. And so I've been given an assignment. Somebody has asked me to help think through some of the categories. And one of the things I have to convince people of immediately is that the middle way is not always what we're looking for. Even if we're looking for a third way, a way out of the dualism, the binary, splitting the middle isn't always the way to go. So I prepared this little prezi, and I thought we'll talk about how to do that, and I will have some examples, 4 different ways we can get out of this whole thing. So the first one is creation and evolution. We've inherited this oppositional framework, mostly ignorant of the other side. We do caricatures and scarecrow. We beat the crap out of those opinions without really investigating what's going on. Then we have a group come along like Intelligent Design, who's recently tried to split the middle and find a third way or a middle way between the two. But I think that in an instance like this, the only way to really get out of that conversation altogether is to get a non-Western perspective. So you've got to look for indigenous voices in this case. Vine Deloria Jr. wrote Evolution, Creationism, and Other Modern Myths. Because if we only work with the data that we have been given, it's been boiled down, shaved off, and we've been given just this little bit of clay to work with, we're never going to be able to make the story or find the way forward that we're looking for. And so in that case, splitting the middle isn't the answer. You have to get outside of the binary altogether. You need an outside perspective. So another one is this red state, blue state thing we've been given. We live in a really oppositional, adversarial, contentious time in politics, and it's just not helpful. And so this whole red state, blue state split is very divisive and very corrosive to the public conversation about the best for the future of our country. And so this is one of those cases where you don't want to find a middle way. So people started talking about purple states or being a centrist. This is one of those cases where being a centrist is not what we're looking for. We want to blow up the binary altogether. And so the 2 ideas that I have found that were helpful for this, a book called Our Patchwork Nation, talks about 12 different types of communities that make up our American society. And when you realize that these 12 different types of communities are like a patchwork, like a quilt across our nation, it makes a lot more sense. It rings a lot more true than just going red state, blue state, or doing coast and flyover country. Those things just don't work. My favorite is from the late 70s, called The 9 Nations of North America. It is still, in my opinion, the most fascinating way, especially because I'm a dual citizen with Canada. It looks at the entire North American context and says by any definition of culture, there are at least 9 in North America. And still today, I think this is the truest and most interesting theory for looking at how our society works. Another one is, so that's 2. Here's a third one, Jihad versus McWorld. And this is a book by Benjamin Barber. And it's a really interesting concept that when you have 2 things, and this is relevant especially right now with this clash of civilizations that we have inherited, and flares up in our ongoing endless wars and now terrorist attacks. So one of the things you have to realize is that Jihad and McWorld are actually in a symbiotic relationship. Even though it looks like they are adversaries, they're actually in a symbiotic relationship, and they give rise to one another. So there's this third category that we have of things that are paired, like mind and matter, talking versus doing, theory versus application, instead of realizing that, the mind and matter, mind is an emergent reality that it rises up out of a physical reality. Our brain is made out of matter. They're not entirely different things. Talking and doing are not 2 different things. Talking is a kind of doing. And so when we think in these false binaries, these dualisms, they haunt us because they become paralyzing. We get analysis paralysis, as they say. And so I think there's something really dangerous about not realizing that sometimes when you have two things, like Jihad and McWorld, they're not, yes, they are adversarial, but they also have a symbiotic relationship where they actually inform and fuel each other. They actually need each other. And without realizing that that third thing, which is their relationship together, without looking at how they relate to each other, it is always going to be perpetually frustrating and elusive to find anything, a way forward. Their relationship together, how they influence and inform one another, that third thing is the relationship of how they are connected. Another one that, and this one comes up all the time, is gender essentialist kind of understandings of male and female. So one of the things I found, it's the simplest way to do it, is just to make a grid. So you put male and female right down the side, and then on the top you put the category you're looking for. So, does the finances. So when somebody has some notion that the man should do the finances, or the woman should do this, just put a grid up there, and you'll see quickly how false doing this. Women are organized, men are like, well, that's not true. There are women who are unorganized, there are men who are very organized. Any analysis at all of this kind of gender binary breaks down almost immediately. Who should initiate sex? So look at healthy relationships or couples, marriages, and look, and you'll find that in any way just putting this in a simple grid will destroy your ability to say men are this way, women are this way. It just doesn't work. There's a falseness through the whole thing. And some people try and go to scripture to back it up. But if you grid this, even with the scriptures, you'll find that the exceptions don't just prove the rule, they actually undo the entire thing. Here's another one. How does religion relate to culture? So we have Christ and Culture is a famous book, or you have the church as it relates to culture. There's a group called Radical Orthodoxy that says there are only two options, belief and nihilism. And you're just like, what are you talking about? No, there's this whole collage and this myriad of options that people have learned to negotiate and navigate in the modern, now postmodern world. It's just a ridiculous statement. So of course they're going to come to the conclusions that they come to if they start with a false binary, like, well, I guess if that's your starting point, I see how you could get there. The fact that this doesn't hold any water at all is kind of disturbing, but that's a different conversation. So we talk about the pre-modern, the modern, the postmodern. That's the basic way of doing that. But within the postmodern, you also have these two other categories of the people who are anti-modern and people who are counter-modern. And so I don't have time to go into that. We can do that some other time. I just wanted to say that we have inherited post-Enlightenment these categories for religion, that it's a private thing, not a public, right? As long as you have belief and you keep it private, you're fine. It's when it comes out into public that it becomes a problem. But that binary is problematic. And so what I want to do is I want to say, add a third thing, which is the personal. Because there are things that are personal, like my convictions, that aren't private, right? Even if I don't drag them out into public, they're not just kept to me. It's a smaller ring, say my family or my comrades, my partners. So there's the personal, there's the private, and there's the public. But then to create a fourth category and say there's something beyond public, which is political. And so by taking that false binary and splitting it, first adding a third, and then going outside to get a fourth, you have a much better picture for any issue, say as it relates to religion. You have the private, the personal, the public, and then the political. And that's a much better conversation to have than that false dualism that we get between private and public. So when it comes to our faith, we have inherited, we have been given all sorts of dualisms, these binary pairings, heaven and hell, as if there's not a life between them, orthodox and heretical, which is a weird one to look at how things became orthodox, because you have this thing called proto-orthodox, and the only way we know about the heretics is because the writings of those who ended up becoming orthodox is how we know about the heretics for the most part. People talk about transcendent and immanent or divine and human as if they're entirely different things. In fact, this is one of the reasons Christology is so important, is in what way was the divine presence in Jesus? In what way did Jesus, the human, show us the divine? Fascinating stuff. And I would use a Jihad versus McWorld pairing here to say that when you're having that conversation about the divine and the human, or the transcendent and the immanent, the relationship between them is that third category that becomes so vital. And the last one is Protestant and Catholic. As if the Anabaptists weren't there the entire time. Even that split that we're given is false from the very get-go, because there was a third right from the very beginning. Just a little bit of examination of church history will reveal that. Okay, so my time is up. That was a whirlwind tour of busting the binary, and I hope that you found it helpful. I would love to hear your feedback or anything that you want me to spend more time on. But hopefully that satisfied some of the categories that I have been asked to help people get outside of the limitations of the false dualism that we've been given.